Hello, welcome to TechPoint Fundamentals YouTube channel. In this video today we will learn about REST API. What are REST principles and how a web API is different from a RESTful WCF. We will also see HTTP verb routing. It means what is the difference between MVC routing and web API routing, and what is the difference between SOAP and REST, or web API versus WCF. So I will show you all these points with practical demo. So let's start the video. So the first question, what is REST? So REST is nothing but a representational state transfer. So the REST represents this representational state transfer. So the REST term is coined by Roy Fielding in 2000. REST is nothing but an architectural style for designing loosely coupled over HTTP. Using this REST, you can use loosely coupled application which can work on HTTP protocol, hypertext transfer protocol. So the term loosely coupled means there is no tight coupling between client and server. Both are independent and there is no contact between these two. So they will work as stateless. I will show all the principles of REST. So based on that we define the REST API. So that is the meaning of this loosely coupled, and it works on HTTP protocol. In REST, data and functionality are considered as a resource. So each and everything in REST is treated as resource, and this resource might be any functionality or any data. A service can perform some functionality, or it either can return some information or data to the client. And the client here might be mobile application, browser, HTTP client, or anybody. And each and every resource must be unified by unique URI. Every resource can be accessed using URI. URI is nothing but uniform resource identifier. You can take a snapshot of this screen if you want to keep that. Resources are decoupled from their representation so that their content can be accessed in a variety of formats. So I have already created a video on content negotiation. I will recommend you to please go and watch that video. And in that video I have explained everything about content negotiation and how it works, how default content negotiators select the best possible representation for the client, and how you can create your own custom media type formatter also. So this is the point what it is trying to say. Resources are decoupled from their representation. So there are two things. One, that is the actual resource, and second thing, that is representation. Representation is nothing but the media type. Media type means either it can be JSON, XML, plain text, text HTML, CSV, uh, anything that is known as representation. And these representation is not dependent on the resource. Resource is different thing and representation is different thing. So that is what it is trying to say, that resource are decoupled from their representation. And in the content negotiation video I have explained that you have created a resource or a web API. Now there is a separate pipeline or separate layer that identify, that works on this representation part, and the web API engine or pipeline sends the data in that format in which the client can understand those format. So this is not dependent on the resource. Resource is unique and you can create it, but when it comes to the client, there is separate mechanism that is called a representation, and in terms of web API media type formatter that is responsible to represent the data in different format. By default web API use XML and JSON format, and by default it returns JSON. But if anybody wants in XML format, they can pass that in the content negotiation parameter in accept header. So that is this point. The state of the resource at any particular timestamp is known as resource representation. And why this is important? The resource representation at any given moment of time, and the point it is trying to say that it might be possible the resource is same, sometime it represents the data in XML format, sometime it might be possible at JSON format, but at any given moment of time it can represents only one, not both. For example, if you want any API that return a data in both format, XML and JSON, so that will not be possible. Either at a time it can send in the JSON format or XML format. Metadata about resource is available and used. So when the web API or any REST API sends the data or response to the user or client, it also sends the metadata about the data. For example, if you see here, header, this is nothing but the metadata about the data. This complete request header, if you see accept type, user agent, accept encoding, accept language, these are the metadata about the data. So these are also sends along with the response, that this HTTP status code also. So these are the metadata about the resources also available and it can be used by the client side, for example to control caching, detect transmission errors, negotiation and appropriate representation format, authentication, access control. These can be passed along with the header. You can pass these parameters along with this header to control the content negotiation, representation format, accept, encoding. Multiple attributes are there. I have explained all those attributes in the previous video of content negotiation. I will highly recommend you to please and go watch that video. And the last confusing point about the developer is REST and HTTP. So both REST and HTTP are not same. HTTP is a protocol, REST is nothing but a mechanism or you can say architectural style uh, which follow the REST principle. And the REST works on HTTP. But these two are different, not same. So I have created a simple API, REST API, and I have defined some method get, put, post and delete. If you run this application, I have already started this. So this get method, if you set this, you are getting the data in JSON format, right? Similarly, if you change this accept from JSON to XML, now you will get data in XML format, right? So at any given moment of time you are getting either JSON or XML, but you have not changed any logic here. This is my resource, right? And this resource is unique, this resource, and there is no need to change any logic or anything in this resource or API, but this content negotiation or you can say this header is responsible for different representation, and there is content negotiation, or you can say in web API term media type formatter, which read these uh, accept headers metadata, and accordingly it sends the data in that format. So there are some REST principle which you have to follow, and this is not any hard and fast rule, but for making a true REST application, you must have to consider these principles. Since REST is an architectural style like any other architectural style, REST also has some guided constraint or instruction or rule that must be satisfied if an interface need to be referred as RESTful. So there are two things, REST and RESTful. So the API which follow these REST principle uh, is known as RESTful services. So the first rule of REST is, and in a lot of interview question it is asked that what do you mean or what do you understand by REST? What are the different REST principles? So there are 6 REST principles. The first one is uniform interface. A resource is in the system should have only one logical URI. It means each and every resource should be unique. Resource representation should be self-descriptive. This is the first rule. So the reason behind to make use of this REST principle is uh, these should be self understandable, and each and every resource means each and every API must be unique. You cannot have multiple get, you cannot have multiple post, because when there will be multiple resource with the same name, in that case there will be ambiguity arise, and the controller will not able to resolve that ambiguity, and it will throw you exception that multiple resources were found with the same name. I will show that as well. And each and every must be unique. Resource representation should be self descriptive. This is the mean that the resource, for example here, this resource is belonging to the customer. So now when anybody, if you send the documents or data this to anybody for development, then each and everybody have to only know about the resource URL. For example, if I have to use any service, then what I have to know, just this resource API, this get is what is the purpose of this get? This is nothing but a customer. When we hit this API, we will get customer, and this get, this is universal, that what is the meaning of the get? Get is nothing but the HTTP verb. It means it will return some data, either list or normal single item. So this will be a get method, so that there is no meaning to have this get, right? So this is everybody known that this is a standard practice. What is the use of this get method? This will return some data. This cannot be post in the REST. So when you send this, you will get the data. If you change JSON, similarly it should be self-descriptive, and it should also describe everything. If you suppose, if you remove this, if you send this, though you are not passing any headers metadata, but still when you receive the response, you will get all those metadata. For example, if you see here, content type applications like JSON, char set, content length, and user agent accept, accept language, accept encoding. All these metadata will be along with this resource. They will explain everything about this resource. Client and server. The second principle of REST is client and server. Client and server must be able to evolve separately without any dependency on each other. So like SOAP services, because there is tight dependency between client and server, but that is not in case of REST API. Both client and server uh, can live separately. There is no dependency on each other. But in case of SOAP, if you change anything in the server side, it must be changed on the client side as well. Otherwise, you will not be able to run that. But here, the client may be your mobile application, your web application, browser, HTTP client, anybody. But there should not be any dependency on each other. The client should be isolated or independent, and same server must be isolated and independent. What client have to know, it must have to know only the resource URI, and that's it. If I have this, whether you call this from this HTTP client or from anywhere, for example from browser, you will get the data. There is no dependency. This browser client or this is our client, both can access that. And stateless. The third point or third principle of REST is stateless. The REST API is stateless. It makes all client server interaction stateless. Stateless means the server will not contain any context, any data of the client on server in between the request. So it is responsibility of the client to send all the necessary information along with the request, so that server can understand who is sending the request, and client is responsible for managing the state of the application. So if you remember, if you are working on the API, you have to do authentication, authorization, and that should be on the client side itself, not server side. We are using JWT token and other mechanism, bearer token mechanism to make authentication. And cacheable. The fourth REST principle is cacheable. If required, the REST can use caching to cache the data based on the requirement if possible, if because it also improve the performance of the application and also the server life as well, because as many there are caching, so there is no need to hit the server again and again. If a resource is cacheable, then a client cache is given the right to reuse the resource response. So if you see here, let me show you cache control, no cache. Currently we have not used any caching, that's why there is no cache. If you want, you can use the caching mechanism as well. If you use caching, in that case the server will not use the client, there is no need to hit the server again and again. It will be stored in the client. Layered system. So the fifth principle of REST is layered system. So there is no such a rule that each and every thing should be located on the server itself. The layered system allow you to use layered system architecture where you can deploy the API on different server A and store the data on different server, for example database and all those things on different server B, and authentication request from server C. For example, if you have deployed your API on Azure cloud and you have store your database on Amazon cloud, and for authentication you are using oath for Facebook, Google, or anything, anybody. So these, and there is no clue to the client that where and how the system is architectured at server side. So these are uh, managed by the server. There is no dependency on the client side how they are communicating or with each other. Code on demand, and this is the last principle, and this is also optional. So this is not mandatory for REST, that you can extend the functionality of any code. You can return the executable code from the service. REST allow client functionality to extend by downloading and executing a code in the form of applet or script. You can return JavaScript code or anything, HTML code content. If you have working on MVC web application, sometimes there is a need to send some HTML data or anything. In that case, you can use this. Most of time you will send in the static representation, but if possible you can send the executable code as well. So this is the last principle. And if you see this uniform interface, so this, the first rule is very important. Each and every resource should be unique and self-descriptive. Self-descriptive means the same thing. To make it self-understandable, self-descriptive, you have to use HTTP verb, and these are based on HTTP: get, put, post, delete, patch, and head. So these are the different HTTP verbs. So if you see here, I have used get, post, put, delete. These are the, and there is nothing to tell the client that what is the meaning of this post. Everybody knows that the post is used for posting the data or creating the resource on the server, and put is used for updating a resource, and delete is used for deleting the record. So this is self descriptive. What are these operations? These operations are for customer. So this customer get means it will return the data for the customer. Post, this will post the data to the server, it will create some resource, record created successfully. And put, this is for updating the record updated successfully. And similarly delete, for deleting the record. So this is the true REST API. But this is not recommended at every time, that you can also use other name as well. For example, in this API, instead of get, put, post, you can use any other name as well. For example, traditional naming convention: customer detail, get customer details, put customer, or update customer. So these naming conventions are also allowed. So let me hit this API, get customer details, send, right? See that error message. What is the issue with this? 4 not 5, method not allowed. I am using get, but when you get customer detail, when you use this get customer details, you are able to get the data from server. But when you are using this customer detail, you are not getting any data. If you see the error message, the requested resource does not support HTTP method GET. 405. Now the rule which I have told you, it is always recommended that you have to use these HTTP verb or uniform name, but if not possible, you can use the traditional naming convention as well. But in that case, you have to explicitly use you have to explicitly decorate that method with HTTP attribute. And this, since this customer detail does not use either HTTP verb naming convention like get, put, post, neither the prefix with get and post, put, whatever it is. If you see closely, see this method, here I have appended prefix get, and this get is this one. So that's why when you hit this API get customer details, since you have appended this get attribute, it will, the system understand that this is a get operation. So that's why you are able to get the result, right? This is binded to the get method. But when you are not using this get prefix, in this case customer detail, the system is unable to understand what is the type of this operation, whether it is get, put, post, delete, what is this. So that's why you are getting 405 here. And similarly put customer as well. If you use this put customer, and update customer, let me use this, record updated successfully. This put customer, it is showing that HTTP method post is not understandable here, 405. So what you have to do, so there are some additional mechanism or logic also which enable this HTTP verb routing. So this is known as HTTP verb routing, where you have to either use the method name with this get, put, post, delete, patch, head, or if you are using traditional naming convention, in that case you have to use HTTP verb explicitly, and then this web API use traditional or conventional routing along with this HTTP verb routing. So here HTTP verb routing is being used here. Here you have to use HTTP post here, and this for get customer you have to use HTTP get. Now you are explicitly decorating this method as get. So when the routing will happen, it will check these attributes to map. When user post this get, it will bind to this method. Similarly when post to this method. Now if you run this program, so the routing between MVC and web API, this is the only difference, that in case of web API it use attribute based routing, HTTP verb routing, not attribute based. HTTP verb routing, and routing in web API can route request by HTTP verb in addition to traditional routing controller than action name. This is this is being used in MVC, but in web API HTTP verb routing is also there. Web API can use the HTTP verb in this route to determine the method to call the controller. In live with method name, HTTP attribute can also be used to designate the accept verb explicitly. That's what we are doing here. I have explicitly tell this is a post method and this is the get method. Now if you hit this customer detail, get customer detail, you are able to get the data from server. If you go to put customer, you are getting record updated successfully, right? So this is all about attribute HTTP verb attribute routing. Now the interviewer asks that does the web API replace WCF? So that is not true. WCF has different role and different purpose, and web API have different purpose. It is written completely new by Microsoft to design a REST API which works on HTTP protocol, but WCF is SOAP based, and in that it is only basically designed for creating service oriented application or SOAP services, while web API is designed for REST services. And it is also possible in WCF also to create RESTful services, but they are not completely RESTful. You have to do a lot of things in order to make a SOAP service as RESTful. So for creating a RESTful SOAP, I will show you. Let me close this. So for creating SOAP service, first you have to create data contact. So if you are new to WCF, if you want, please do comment. I can post a separate video on SOAP, how SOAP can be created and how you can call the SOAP services. But for now I have just created a simple RESTful SOAP service. So first you have to create data contract. So data contract is nothing but you can think this like the model which we create in a web API, right? First you have to create data contract, this one data contract. So here I am creating data contract for a customer, and in that I am defining data members. These are the data member of this data contract. This is the model and these are the member. So this is the first, create data contract and then define data members. And the second thing what you have to do, you have to create service contract. Service contract means the repository, service repository, iService. So this is our service contract. This defines the services which we are going to expose, right? So this is the service contract, and in this service contract, this is the name of the service, iService. This is nothing but interface, and in this interface or service contract I have to define the contract. We know that interface is used for defining the contract, so since we are defining service here, so that's why it is service contract. And in this I can define any number of service contract. For example, here I have defined two, XML and JSON. So if you remember, in the REST API, whether you want to get the data in XML or JSON, you can use this except header, right? But that is not true in case of WCF or SOAP service. If you want to return data in different formats, in that case you have to define different operation contract. This is operation contract. This is nothing but the API method name or service method name, and here you have to define the type or any all the attribute for this operation contract or service. First of all, if you see where it is, this service contract, define the operation contract, and then you have to set web invoke attribute, and you have to set all the type, because this web invoke attribute is used to create a RESTful service in SOAP or WCF. So I have to decorate this operation contract with a web invoke attribute, and method type is get here. Response format, what will be the response format this operation contract or service? It will return XML. Body style, it is optional, you can either use bare, or if you see here there are multiple wrapped request, wrapped response, so you can use anything here where you want to wrap the request or response or not. Now URI template, you have to define the name of this service, get customer XML. This will be the name of API. So this is same, you can change it here, but these method name can be different, so you can control that from here. Similarly, if you also want the data in the JSON format, because JSON is lightweight compared to XML. By default, this WCF service return XML data, but if you want JSON, you have to use this response format as JSON. And if you want both format, in that case you have to define two different methods. And if you remember, in Web API there is no need to define separate method, for one for XML, one for JSON. All these is handled by the content negotiation or media type formatter by request header attribute accept, right? So that is the main different. Now you have to create this service contract. Now the third point, you have to implement the service contract. Here you have just defined the service contract, or you can say the interface. Now you have to implement these interface as well, right? So services.svc, here I have created a class here, and this will implement this iService. This is nothing but the service contract which you have defined here. So I have defined both the method get customer XML and get customer JSON, and I have initialized the value here itself. I have not called any database here. Now your service is ready, right? And this is not done at all, because you have created the service, but in order to consume this service you have to do a lot of setting as well. But in case of Web API there is nothing to do. If you have created controller and define the API name, then that's it. Everything will be taken care by the MVC Web API engine, whether they have to send in XML or JSON, and how these API name will be resolved at client side. But in case of WCF, you have not done all the things. Now the fourth point, you have to configure service behavior and HTTP binding for REST. So you have to go and in web.config you have to do configuration setting as well. You have to configure service, you have to configure service behavior, and in this behavior you have to configure endpoint behavior as well, right? So first, I will show you the configure service, how you can configure the service. So if you see here, this point you have to add when you create this project, WCF project. It will not be there because this is additional which you have created. Since I have created services, iService contract, so you have to define that here. RESTful WCF.service. The name of this service will be the full name, RESTful WCF.service. RESTful WCF, this is the namespace name, and this is the service name, or you can say the class name. So that's what I have defined here. The name is because it is dependent on your naming convention, right? What you have done. So it will not generate automatically. You have to define this explicitly for each and every API, each and every service which you are going to create in the WCF service. I have created two services here, so that's why I have to define this namespace and service name. And for configure service behavior, I have used this service behavior name here. So somewhere I have to define this service behavior. So this one, service behavior, and this service will use service behavior from here, where whatever I have defined here. The service behavior is service metadata HTTP get enable. HTTPS get enable. It means it will work on both HTTP get and HTTPS, these protocols. So this is the behavior, how it will behave on. And endpoint, you have to define address or SOAP. If you want, you can define endpoint. And binding, web HTTP binding. This is the attribute which you have to use, web HTTP binding for RESTful. If you see here, web HTTP binding for REST. For REST, you have to use this web HTTP binding. That's what I have to define, web HTTP binding. And contract. What is contract? Means what is the service I have to expose. The contract which you have defined, service contract, right? This is service contract, and this is the iService. So when you qualify the full name, RESTful WCF.iService, that's what I have used here. And behavior configuration, I have used web here, so somewhere I have to define this behavior configuration as well. So that behavior configuration is here, endpoint behavior, and behavior name is web. So this web name is I have used here. This is endpoint. And similarly, I have also exposed this one endpoint. This is for SOAP. Now these settings you have to do in order to expose your RESTful WCF service. Now this is not done yet. You cannot consume directly. Let me run this project, set as a startup project, and let me run this project, Control F5. So SOAP services generate WSDL, WSDL you can say. So in order to consume these SOAP service or RESTful SOAP service or RESTful WCF, you have to generate WSDL document and consume the service at client side. But if you remember, in case of web API, there is nothing to do. I have hosted or run the application. You can directly call this API from browser or any HTTP client directly. There is no dependency at all. But in case of this WCF, so this is how your directory look like if you enable the directory browsing. So there is nothing interface. In order to hit the service, it will, if you go here, services.svc. Now this is your service. It means your service is running perfectly. There is no issue. And see the message, you have created a service, right? I have created a service and it is running. To test this service, you will need to create a client and you need to call the service, right? You have to create the client here. You cannot directly use this service. You can do this using the svc util.exe tool from the command line with the following syntax. This one, WSDL. That's what I am trying to say here, that you have to generate WSDL at your client side, that will generate all the proxies and endpoint for you. Let me show you this WSDL. If I am able to WSDL document for this. See, this is the WSDL document and this is XML format. These WSDL document contains all the things, right? Serialization, RESTful, and each and every type. What is the request? What is the response? What is the if you see, input message JSON, output message JSON, input XML, output XML. Because I have used two API, one for XML and one for JSON, to service contract operation. This is, if you see, whatever contract which we have used, that is what operation contract. This is operation contract here, and binding, whatever binding we have used, basic HTTP binding for iService. This is iService. And similarly, if you go, these are all the other attributes as well. So let me run this URL here. WSDL, single WSDL. This is the endpoint. If you see here, address this svc.soap. If you see this URL, this is the same thing. If I have used single WSDL here, and somewhere these are the, see, this is a sequence of attribute customer, whichever the data construct which we have defined, and that data contract contains these attributes: name, age, email ID, and gender. All these are the data contact attribute. And here also the same request and response format. So these WSDL document are beneficial when you are generating the proxy at client side for the SOAP service. And now the service which I have created, let me use this. When you call this get XML, now you are getting the data in XML format, and get customer JSON. When you call this, you are getting the JSON data. So, but here I am calling this data from this browser directly. But in this case, you are not able to, you will not be able to generate this request from the client directly. You have to generate the proxy from this digital document and auto discover all these metadata information, and based on that you have to pass this, and you have to create SOAP envelope, all those things. So you cannot pass this directly. So this is too difficult, or you can say it will take a lot of time, a lot of configuration, and it might be possible sometimes you have to face a lot of issue while you are configuring this service and for different protocols as well. So that's how you can create a RESTful WCF service. Now coming to the last point, what is the difference between Web API and WCF, or you can say REST versus SOAP. So the first difference is protocol. Web API supports only HTTP protocol, as this is the principle of REST. It only operate on HTTP protocol, but WCF can support multiple protocol like HTTP, HTTPS, TCP, named pipe, etc. Representation. Web APIs support many representation format. For example, JSON, XML, text plain, CSV, any type you can create via creating custom metadata formatter. It can support. WCF supports normally XML. Not normally, you can say always XML. It can only understand XML format and it can return data in XML format. But in case of RESTful WCF, it can also return JSON format, as we have seen here, right? But for that you have to go with all these steps, right? These one. Wait, how heavy the request and response. So this is the major disadvantage of WCF service or SOAP based service, that each and every request and response format is clubbed into a request and response SOAP envelope, right? So that make this SOAP request and response very heavy. But since Web API support REST principle and JSON, it is more lightweight, because JSON is much lightweight compared to XML, because in XML along with the data it also contain tags, and it will create it will increase the size of the response. Configuration. WCF requires a lot of configuration to run, as I have shown you that in this configuration you have to define all these things, and if you want a different configuration behavior for different API, you have to create for each and every, but it is not in case of REST or Web API. Type. WCF REST API is good for message queue, duplex communication, one-way messaging, all those type of application. But Web API is only better for creating HTTP based service, and this is completely based on MVC, and you know the advantage of MVC, right? Hosting. WCF service can be hosted within the application, IIS or Windows service or console application, anywhere. Web API can be hosted within the application or IIS. I have shown you that how you can host within the application, that you can run multiple projects at same time in the same solution file, so that both can be, one can hit the API of the in the same solution. Now the last point is security. If you're talking about the security, so WCF has a lot of security mechanism, but in case of Web API, the only way you can use is bearer token authentication, JWT authentication, and also there are some issues with Web API, that under posting, over posting, and other security bugs as well. So that's all for today. If you have learned something from this video, please subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to like and share this video. Thank you very much for watching this video.